If you remember, Kevin, you can start anyone else.
Yeah, I need to go get my book. I forgot my book. It's out at the table. It's down by my stuff out there.
Okay.
It's Drush, I think. It's like this thin Drush book thing. So we'll see. I think we can jam another 10 people in here.
Can we try?
Must feel good, right?
Yeah. It can be 10 people or 100 people, I don't mind. Works either way. What's that?
He is stacked.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't think of any creative questions though to ask for it, so.
Choose the best question one to ask.
Yeah. Nobody donated a Git book, so.
I was gonna say Drush book couldn't be that thick.
Oh. Depends on if you're just using the basic commands or if you're making your own commands.
Isn't that what the man pages are for?
What's that?
Isn't that what man pages are for?
Exactly, yeah. I wonder if this is up to date.
It's really hard not to make Git ones.
Well, we have the Git book online, so we can go off of that. All right, so it's pretty close to 1. Obviously, everyone was prepared for this, so we can go ahead and get started. I don't think you guys are looking forward to it or anything here. I don't know. Hopefully, we don't disappoint. So today we're going to be talking about Git-Flow for daily use. Not necessarily Git in general, but actually the methodology of Git-Flow. My name is Kevin Bassarab. I've been with MediaCurrent for about a year now. Before that, did a whole bunch of work at newspapers through Morris Communications and other entities like that. Started using some version control at Morris, trying to get them into version control at the time because they weren't using it. So we were doing, corporate-wise, we're using Perforce. For our third-party projects, we started going to SVN. Then I saw the light of Git, and it was like, why was I even trying on SVN at that point? So we're going to go through a bit of ideas today on taking the basic concepts of Git and applying them into our daily flow, and especially in terms of a multi-environment setup and how we can use Git to better help us in that multi-environment setups. So, some prerequisites while you're all here. Hopefully you meet these. If not, we're going to have some extra seating. You should have a basic understanding of Git already. You should have taken Git 101. If you hadn't, the guy who just left the room, Andrew Riley, has some great presentations online of Git 101 and some of the basics of Git. We're going to go into more, obviously, of the actual concepts behind the Git-Flow style and not actually Git itself. So you should have that basic understanding of Git. You should be looking to use it probably in a multiple environment setup. You don't have to. I've done Git-Flow on just my computer without any pushing to origins or anything like that. But in the most part, this process really works well when you have a dev, stage, prod environment or some sort of multi-tiered environment setup. So another piece is that it's not 100% necessary when using Git-Flow, but you should be comfortable on the command line. There are some graphic tools out there on OS X. There's source tree for Git on the systems, but really you're not going to get the full power unless you're comfortable on the command line and using Git on the command line. It's easier to learn that way. There's more features involved. I think source tree is missing some of the Git-Flow features also. So be comfortable on the command line, and we'll go from there. So, benefits of Git-Flow. Why are we here? What do we want to use this for? What are some options and ideas for what's going to help us in Git-Flow? And this could actually be a good question idea. Who can name any ideas of why you would want to use Git-Flow in your process instead of just standard Git?
Multiple users working on the same projects.
That can be one, yes. It's not one of my 4 points, but you can get the book for that. Any other ideas as well?
So developers don't release your link?
Well, that's a good one too, especially. And it is actually, in a way, that is pseudo to my first point of benefits for daily use, which is parallel development. So Git-Flow makes it very easy to work on a feature, and you're going to hear that word feature a lot while we're talking about Git-Flow. And it's not the same as Drupal features, so don't run in fear if you're already scared of Drupal features. Git-Flow is okay with its terms of features. It's allowing you to quickly switch gears from one feature to another. So if you're working on one part of the project and all of a sudden there's a big bug in some other portion of your project, well, if you've made a bunch of commits now to this part, you don't have to roll back or find and cherry pick things and things like that. You can switch off to a different feature, which is a branch in Git, and quickly switch gears into other parts of it. And we'll go more in depth in that in a little bit. Another option is collaboration and getting multiple developers together, like you mentioned. It expands upon that parallel development by allowing remote users to work on the feature as well. So you can push your feature up to the remote repo, have someone else pull it down, make their changes, merge it all back together. Everyone lives happy. It's really easy to do as well. Release staging environments. Once features are complete, you have one central location now for those final changes. At any time, this can now be rolled into a production environment, and there's no having to go back and forth and question everyone that was working on the project and say, hey, is this part ready, or is this commit ready? Can this roll out? Can that roll out? Anything that's in this environment can roll out to production at any time. You take out that question in mind there. If it wasn't ready to roll out, do a git blame, figure out who did it, and go yell at them, because they shouldn't have been in that branch at the time. And the other point that we're going to look at in terms of benefits is emergency fixes. We all have rolled out code to the site, something broke, and it's never right after you rolled the code out. It's going to be a couple days later, you've been working on a whole bunch of new features, and now you have to roll something out to the site, but this other code you've been working on is broke. So how do I do that? We're going to look into ways of supporting those emergency fixes and what we call hot fixes in Git-Flow for the site. So there's going to be a lot of talk here at first. How I'm going to go about this is we're going to go through a lot of the logic of Git-Flow, and then we're going to go into actually the commands that are powering Git-Flow and how to make that work. So bear with me as we go through some of the text to it, and then we'll look at actually the commands and things like that. This is a combination session of some theory as well as some of the code as well, so we hopefully make everybody happy. So at the core, Git-Flow is a branching and merging strategy. That's all there is to it. It's very simple when you hear it that way. But it doesn't add any new functionality to Git. You think Git-Flow or a new piece of software to go with it. There's no additional functionality being added to Git when you're using Git-Flow. Anything you can do today using Git-Flow, you could do by yourself manually in Git without Git-Flow. You'll probably want to hurt yourself afterwards because this takes so long and you're doing so many steps, but that's what we're doing. What it's doing is basically creating macros for certain functions of Git and your workflow processes. So Git branches are cheap and merges are easy. That's the core principle behind Git-Flow and why you want to go around in this workflow. We can have constant branching and these merging strategies because it's so easy within Git. Other version control systems such as SVN, no knock on SVN too much, but it's kind of a pain to go ahead and do branching and tagging and things like that within it. In other systems, each branch could be a complete replication of code base. I'm looking at USVN. We actually did a migration a few months back of a Drupal site, one of our client sites that was in SVN, and we converted it over to Git. Their site in SVN was a total of 1.5 gigs of data space to store it in SVN. Any guesses on what that was when we moved it to Git?
100 megs.
800 megs?
150.
Less than that.
100K.
100K? No, a bit more than that. We were right at 200 megs for the entire project when we moved it into Git. So that's a huge difference when you're looking at things. And when you're talking about new developers or new people coming into the project, someone getting set up and being able to pull down that project and have all the tags, all the branches, everything they need, and only have to download 200 megs of data versus 2 gigs of Git data, that's a pretty nice incentive there. And you actually had developers working that and not drinking coffee, watching their command line spin. As much as we'd like to do that. So branching 101. Obviously at the core, like I mentioned, Git-Flow is based upon the idea that branching is easy within Git. So we need to understand some basic branching strategies within Git. As I mentioned, we're not going to go into a lot of core Git stuff, but we do need to know some branching 101. So welcome to branching 101. This is the basic command to see, and I don't know how well, is everyone able to read that well? It looks a little blurry to me, but okay. So it's git branch -a. And what this is going to let us do is look at all the branches that are currently on our Git repo. And it's also going to show all of our remote branches as well. So anything that you might not have locally, it's just on the remote, or anything else locally here. So in the instance here, we run our git branch RSA command, and in this instance, we have a develop branch, a master branch, and 2 remote branches. The star indicates we're on our develop branch, just like in core normal Git. So we know that we're on our develop branch at this point. The next thing we'd want to do is learn how to create a new branch if we wanted to. So what we would run for that is git checkout -b and that new branch name, or -b rather, minus hyphen, whatever you want to call it. What that's going to do is take whatever branch we're on. So in this case, we were on develop. And we're going to create a new branch called new_branch, and we're going to switch that branch immediately. If we wanted to, we could just run a git branch and new_branch command, and that'll create that new branch, but we're going to stay on our develop branch at that point. This just saves us a step. Obviously, we as developers want to save as many keystrokes as we can, so we want to go ahead and make that happen there, and I use that all the time. Here's what would happen if we did just run git branch. Then again, after that, we could see our new branch was created, and we were switched over to it. Our asterisk has moved from develop onto our new branch at that point. If we were to create git branch test_2 again, we would end up having a test_2 in there, but we would still be stuck on the new branch at that point. So here's a basic structure, very, very basic chart of what a git branching strategy looks like. What we're basically doing is we have our develop branch running down in this straight line. We branch off into it, and then at some point this is going to merge back in. We have commits going all the way through here, more commits happening on the develop, and then they'll merge back together at some point down the line. Git-Flow is helping to alleviate some of the concerns there. Git also takes care of conflicts pretty easily as well, and is pretty good at figuring out what needs to happen. We'll go into more of that in a little bit as well. So merging 101, this is where we're going to bring that new branch back into our develop branch at the end. It's a very simple command to do it. All we have to do is say git checkout develop, and at that point we're to the branch that we want to merge into. So keeping our example going, we were on the new_branch. Now we're going back to our develop branch, and we want to merge in new_branch into our develop. So all we have to run is git merge new_branch, and that's going to bring any of our changes into develop and try and put it all together. Normally, this is going to run no problem, and you're going to have, it'll just all come together without any issues. But there will be conflicts here and there arise, and we're not going to go into that today because that could be an entire session, and all of you would be in that session as well, including myself, when we if we went into conflict. So that could be another camp at that point. Some other things you're going to need to know. We've gone through, you already had taken Git 101 before. We've gone through some branching 101 and merging 101 right now. Now it's time for your vocabulary lesson and learning some of the terminology within Git-Flow, because we're going to use these terms a lot throughout the presentation today. And whenever you're talking to anyone running a Git-Flow strategy, these terms are going to come up a lot at that point. The first one you're going to want to learn is master branch. This is going to be your production site code base. Nothing should ever be committed manually to master branch. This should always run through a Git-Flow command. If you're making a code change or something like that, you're not committing to master. You're going to be committing to something else. If you're committing to master, you're doing it wrong. So,
unless you're using Acquia Dev, you commit to master and then you push it to production.
We're gonna get to some reasons though, and you're not actually committing directly. You're gonna be doing merges and Git-Flow to take care of that for you. So you're not committing directly to it, but Git-Flow will be. We'll get to that in a little bit though. So that's the production site code base. The develop branch. This is where all the code I mentioned earlier was ready for production release. Anything that's on this develop branch can and will at any time be rolled out to production. If you have broken code sitting on the develop branch, then you're going to be the one yelled at for breaking production site because it could roll out to production without you ever knowing it. Anything on develop, it should always be ready to roll out to the production site. You can commit to this though. Unlike master, if you need to make a change, you can go ahead and commit to the develop branch. Usually when I do that, it's when I have to make one commit. I know I'm not going to need a bunch of commits or anything like that. It's somewhat of a hot fix. I'll just make that commit there. The reason why you try to avoid committing directly to the develop branch, especially if you're in a big distributed environment and lots of people working on the project, one of those benefits we talked about, parallel and collaboration, is if everyone's committing to develop branch and pushing to origin, you're never going to be able to push to origin. As soon as you fetch and rebase, someone else is pushed, and you're not going to be able to push again by the time you do that. So it gets you, it abstracts people out into their own branches, and you make one merge when you're done, and you're into your developed branch. The next piece is a feature. Features is where all of your active code work is going to be done. Usually this is related to an individual ticket. If you're using OpenAtrium, Jira, Basecamp, name your favorite ticketing system, they all have a ticket number on them. Normally what we're going to do is this feature is going to be related to that one ticket, and you want to keep your features related just to that ticket. Don't start, just like if you see a ticket and a client or someone that you're working with asks you to do 10 other different things unrelated to that ticket within the one ticket, and you say, hey, this needs to be another ticket, let's open a different one up. We want to do the same thing in our feature branches. Keep everything contained to exactly what that ticket is, and we're going to go through some naming strategies a little later today as well, and having that ticket number contained is going to help us out a lot more. All of our commits are related to that. We can go see the ticket, what was to be done, what happened, all of it's contained together. A release. This is going to be actually where this is a temporary integration branch for rolling out to production. So basically at this point, you're going to take develop, you're going to merge it into your master production instance, and this is going to be where you do all of your testing and fixes. So when something breaks, or if there's a conflict or anything happens, you're going to fix this on the release branch, have all your commits in there, and when you're done and you finish that release, it's going to merge into master, and that's where the commit happens onto the master branch. But we'll get into the actual code of that as well. And the final one that we're going to look at is called hot fixes. These are those emergency fixes to the site. Basically, the concept behind that is that we're going to take master, branch off of that, make our changes, commit back to master, but also commit back to develop. And we'll go through that as well in more detail later on. So we've got all our prereqs done. We've gone through our different pieces. Now we're going to get into some fun charts that'll really confuse you a little bit. It is good, isn't it? The first time I saw this, I said, oh, no way. There's no way. But as you start breaking it apart and start understanding the concepts of Git-Flow, hopefully by the end of the day, especially, you'll understand the concepts behind this chart. And the way we read it is that it's not really going to fit real well on the slide. That's why you can barely read it. But each colored column is representing a branch with different commits in it. So we're starting out, we've got our master branch and different commits along it. We've got our hot fixes and commits that happen there, release branches, develop branch, and feature branches all the way down. And you can see how the number of commits gets lower and lower as you get from left to right across the chart. And we're going to break this down and look into the different sides of it. You'll always want to read, you're already starting to read from the top right though, because that's our master, that's where that's our starting point, that's our production site. So as we break down, we're starting up at master, and our concept here is that we're taking an existing Git repo that already is being used on a site, and that's our starting point. Now we're going to start using Git-Flow for it. So our initial part that we're going to do is we're going to start our Git-Flow presentation and go on to develop. From there is where our commits are going to happen, and then we can also branch off into feature branches and merge back from there. So here's where we can actually see our feature branch being done, and we're going to merge over to develop. So what we've done, we've started at master, we created a develop branch. Nothing really changed there. We made a couple commits to develop, just individual commits. Then we decided to branch off into a feature branch. So we had a big ticket come in that we knew we were going to have a lot of different work going on. It's going to take a little while. So we're going to keep that abstracted into its own feature branch. Work continues on multiple features. You can have as many of these going at one time as you want. When work finishes on one, it moves right back into the develop branch, merges with any other work that might have happened, and can move on from there. When we're ready to start our release to production again, we merge out into a release branch, make any fixes. So say we're on release branch, this goes to a staging server theoretically. A QA person catches some problems. We make the bug fixes here. Once we're done making those bug fixes and are ready to deploy, we're actually going to merge into master automatically with a tag. We're going to create a tag, it'll merge into master, and at the same time, we're going to merge back into develop. So these bug fixes don't get lost on our next release. Normally, if you're doing this manually, you might forget one of those steps, and most likely the step you're going to forget is coming back to develop. So when version 1.1.1 comes out, all of a sudden these bug fixes are back again.
The green one is the release branch?
The green one is the release branch, yes, and that's going to be your temporary branch. Once you're done and you finish that release branch and merge into master and back to develop, that release branch is deleted. You never see from it again. At this point, once you're actually merged into your master and on production there, if you're on Acquia, you could be deploying. I normally always deploy a tag to production so that there's no accidental committing to master that goes out to production. But normally, if you're doing it through a CI environment or something like that that's got testing involved, your master branch is your production branch. You still have a tag as a backup, but once you commit to master, you've now implemented that. And you can go, if you're manually doing it, you can fetch and rebase on production and get your master caught up, or run your CI, or you have your post-commit hooks that happen for that commit to master. So at the other part to this chart that we didn't go into through all that was the hot fixes. And this is its own little branch that instead of starting off of develop, it's going to start off of master. So if we look back just one slide real quick, when we started a branch here for a feature branch, we started from this develop branch. So we already had these code commits that were before us onto our develop branch. Well, what happens when we've been doing this work, we merge and develop, but then we realized there was a problem with this master branch. And we're not ready to release this code yet out to production. There's some other pieces in here, or we're not in our normal release cycle. We don't want to go back and reset ourselves back in time and lose any work that we might have done. So by doing a hotfix, the difference we're looking at is we're going to branch off of master, create our hotfix, have our 1 or 2 or however many commits it is. Usually it's a very small bug fix that's in a hotfix. There should never be a feature or any new additions in a hotfix. Commit those, and then when you finish your hotfix, it merges back to production as a new tag. You increment your version number, and it will merge back to develop so that those hotfixes aren't lost again as well. That's a very important part to Git-Flow. I can't stress enough is that you're always merging back to develop. Develop is always your normal integration and your normal flow of where all your features are being built at. So now, that was a whole lot of information, a really big chart. All of your heads have probably exploded. Give you just a second to recuperate while I take a drink of water, and then we're going to go through and actually go through actual process and show this in some real life work. We need any paper towels to clean up anything? Good? All right. So here's our real world scenario that we're going to look at today. We're going to start using Git-Flow on a basic Git repo. Like we mentioned, we're going to start with a repo that already exists. We are going to roll code based on a pseudo ticket that we might have. We're going to make something up that we'll use for our ticket. We have a request to make a change, or we're going to have a peer or somebody code review our code, or somebody to help out to build some of the functionality as well. We're going to take this code, we're going to release it to our pseudo production environment, and then we're going to pretend like we were working on some other features, and our boss just realized there was a misspelling or something wrong on production, and they're freaking out. What do we do wrong? We're going to show how to make that fix and get it all working together. So our first step, and we've got 15 minutes to go through it. Awesome. We'll get through it. It's okay. It's not too bad. So first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to install Git-Flow locally. I don't ever go through installation instructions for anything because there's so many variations based on your operating system. Google it. Here are some resources for the 3 main operating systems. There are other options for it. On OS X, I think it's a homebrew. So if you're running homebrew already, you can just do brew install Git-Flow and you're good to go. So once we have Git-Flow set up and working, our next thing we're going to do is we're going to run git status just to show that we're on our branch master, we've got nothing to commit, we're just at a plain repo that's just started out. From here, we're going to run Git-Flow init. And this, like I said, can happen at any point in your process. You can have an existing repo, it could be a fresh repo, doesn't matter. We'll run this. And what this is going to do is initialize your repo for Git-Flow. As I mentioned, it's not adding anything proprietary for Git-Flow. We're just creating new branches that are going to happen here. So what we're asking here when you do a Git-Flow init is which branch should be used for your production release. Normally, all these questions they ask, I just use the defaults for. If you want to be creative, you can, but why? Because then when you start getting confused or wondering the terminology, you're going to be lost in looking for them. So master is your normal production code. Your branch name for your next release developments, develop. Where your feature branches, release branches, hotfix, and support branches will be called. We're not going to go into support branches today. Not really needed for what we want to talk about too much. Basically what's happening here is how Git-Flow is working without installing anything proprietary is it's using these prefixes to a branch name. So in our first example, we made test branch 2 or test branch. It's just a test branch showing up. Well, if you create a feature, it's going to be feature/test branch. And Git-Flow will be looking for that. So that way, it doesn't matter where this is. You can take a regular Git repo. If you had branches set up like this and never actually did it, Git-Flow in it, it'll still run the same way. It'll all work together. So our next step is we're going to pretend like we're going to create a feature now. We've initialized Git, and we want to ensure we're on the develop branch to begin with. The worst thing you can do is work on code on the master branch because then you're committing to master. You're going to have to reset things and back up before you can actually make anything go to production, or someone's not going to be very happy with you one way or the other. So we check to make sure we're on develop. We see our asterisk there, so we know we're on our develop branch. If we weren't on it, we could use just git checkout develop, just a quick tidbit for regular Git. Like I said, in your Git 101, you'll have seen that one. And now we want to start coding our feature. So our first line that we're going to do is Git-Flow feature start, and then a series of numbers and naming convention after that. This naming convention can be whatever you want it to be. Take your setup and do however you want to do it. I'll tell you how ours is. I think it's a great way. If you don't agree, I'm fine with that. What we're doing is we do Git-Flow feature start, and our naming convention is going to be a node ID or a ticket number. So our ticket number is 1, 2, 3, 4. A hyphen, and then our comment number in the ticket if it applies. So for instance, if you're using Open Atrium, it's Drupal, so each comment is identified. So 78900 would be our comment number if there was a whole slew of comments and a lot of different pieces going on in that ticket. And then just a very short description of what the feature is called. Just something so when someone does git branch, they don't have to know the ticket number. They can just see and know which one they want to work on. What Git-Flow feature start's going to do is every time you run that, you're going to get a whole summary of actions that happen. So we switch to a new branch called feature/1234, and what this is basically doing is doing git checkout -b, like we talked about earlier, is what it's doing in the background. It's going to create that branch based off of develop. So we were on develop, we did git checkout -b, we created this feature branch. We're now on that branch, and that's all that Git-Flow feature start did. So you can see how it took 3 steps of manual process, automated it for us. Now we can start committing onto this branch. Once we've made our commits, we're going to pretend like we've done a whole bunch of different pieces here. We've done 3, 4 commits, however much it took. We want to publish this feature because we want to get either a code review or someone else is going to help us on that functionality. So our next step is going to do Git-Flow feature publish. At this point, you're going again, you're using your Git-Flow command, the keyword of publish. So all of our keywords we talked about earlier, release, hotfix, support, if we were into that kind of thing, feature, all those are your first word in the naming convention. And then different words here. We had start to start our feature, publish is going to publish it out, and then our feature name. You'll notice here that we don't have the prefix of feature slash. If you're switching between branches, you'll need to still include that feature slash, but in the terms of Git-Flow, it knows when you say feature here, it's going to prefix that branch name with feature for you. And at this point, it's now going to go out. It's going to check with your remote origin, wherever that might be. In this instance, it was Bitbucket. It checks to make sure that you're allowed to post to it, and it's going to push that feature to origin. So basically, at this point, it's doing git push origin feature /1234 feature name. At that point, that's all it's done again. It's created that new remote branch, and it's tracking it locally so you know you can now push more features to that. After it's being tracked remotely, we're going to pretend like we go into another computer. We're going to do a git fetch to get any new information that might be on that origin. And we're going to do git checkout feature / our feature name. Like I said, that's where in this part we're using regular git commands. So we prepend it with the feature or the branch prefix. When we're in a Git-Flow, we don't have to prepend it. We'll get it from there, and we're going to rebase our origin /feature /feature name. And what that's going to do is on that local machine, the initial checkout of the feature branch, I can now start doing code review. or I can make my own changes to it. I can then push that back up with a normal git command to push back to the origin. And our first user that was creating the content or creating it initially can now do a fetch and rebase in normal git commands to get the changes that this collaborator was able to do. Did I miss anything on that? Nope. So then after that, we've gotten all of our code done. We're ready. We know that this is stable now. We're ready to push this into our develop branch. This is ready to roll out to production whenever our release manager wants to roll it to production. So we're going to finish the feature at this point. If anyone's been paying attention to some of the keywords in the naming strategy, what do you think the command's going to be to finish the feature? Exactly. Git-Flow feature finish. Simple enough. No prefix again. And at this point, we'll go through the manual steps that are happening behind the scenes here. We switched to branch develop, so we ran git checkout develop. We did a git merge feature /1234 happen in the background. We did a git branch -d and the feature / to delete the branch. And we're leaving ourselves on a develop branch. We haven't pushed to origin or anything like that yet. We can do that manually at that point next. So the next one we do would be git push origin develop. If I'm remembering right, there is, I think it's a -k command you can apply as an option to Git-Flow to push to origin or to fetch from origin when you're actually doing those commands. But that's in the man file as well as in the Git-Flow book. And okay, so the other thing you want to remember that I always forget, because Git-Flow does not include this, and it's very good practice to always get into the habit of doing this when you're pushing features around. So remember when we published that feature to origin a little while ago, so if someone else could peer review it for us? Well, once we finished the feature, it deleted that feature locally and that branch locally. So if we did git branch on our local machine, that feature is now gone. But it's still living out there on the origin. So I always like to say to clean up when you finish a feature and be nice to other developers and say git push origin and the feature name. And that's going to delete that feature branch from the origin. And that just lets you, when other developers log in to go to see what's available on origin, they're not going to have a list of 20 or 30 features sitting there and trying to decide which ones are which or which ones are still active and which ones aren't. It just keeps things a lot cleaner for everybody involved. And to create the release, we're going to switch out. We've got ourselves back into develop. We've been testing that some. Everything's working well in the develop branch. Now we're ready to create a release for our code. We're going to switch out feature with the word release. So we're doing a Git-Flow release start this time. And I use the naming convention. This is usually always going to be your naming convention of either your version numbers and your tag number, or in the instance of, I do a lot of publishing houses, and they have to do releases all the time and at random increments. So I use a date scheme for mine. I go year, month, day, and then a .0, .1, .2, whatever it might be for that day. To me, it's just easier for the types of sites I'm working on. So what's going to happen when you do a release start is you're going to switch to a new branch release. And what's happened behind the scenes to keep ourselves going here is we git checkout develop, if we weren't already. We're going to do git checkout -b release /2013-0314. And then at that point, there's nothing else we need to do. We've created our release. At this point, you can now push that up to origin, which is normally what I end up doing because that's where my staging environment would be. Deploy the code on origin, do the QA process, make any bug fixes, and make all those commits directly onto that release branch. Once the release branch is finished, then we can go through, oh, there's the push origin part. So we push it to origin, we're doing our QA, we make our commits, and now we can go through and do our release finish. And at this point, we're going to merge this now into master. So again, you can see this has some of the most actions that are happening here. Behind the scenes, we're going to do a git checkout of master. We're going to git merge the feature into master. We're going to then do a git checkout of develop, merge the feature into develop. We're also going to create a tag based off of master. And we're going to delete that old release branch as well. So at this point, we can then go and delete our release branch from origin again, just like we deleted the feature branch, just to clean up after ourselves. And the next part we'd also want to do is we'd want to, that wasn't the right one. Okay, yeah. So after that, once we actually had the feature finished, or the release finished rather, the last thing we want to do is we want to push that tag up to origin, because that's our marker in time to know where we stood when this release was made. So to do that, we can do git push -- tags, and that's a standard Git command. It doesn't happen all automatically within Git-Flow. It's one of the things you have to remember to do. And all that's doing is taking the tags and pushing them up. So in this case, you can see that it took our new tag that we had created that wasn't on origin and pushed it up to origin at that point. At this point, you can then log into your remote site again, rebase your master on production, or deploy the tag, whatever system you want to do, or your CI environment would have taken it over already at that point. I don't think there are any CI sessions today. Usually I would push to go to a CI session at this point, but I don't think we had any. The last thing we want to look at is hot fixing and what to do at that point. So going back to our theory here, it's going through the same motions we just did on features, releases. Every bit has the same concepts involved with it. So we're going to do a hotfix start. At this point, we're going to break off of master, create a new branch there, commit to it. When we finish it, it'll merge back to master. We've created another new tag, merges back to develop as well. And we follow our same steps we did at the end of a release. Basically, a hotfix is a release. It tags it just the same as a release would. Everything's the same, except you're branching off of master to start instead of develop. That's the only difference between the two at that point.
Do we still have to do the tags?
You'll still have to push the tags, yep. That happens after. What I usually would do is git push origin master and then git push -- tags and go from there. Yeah, definitely. So some other resources that are out there. This first one would be Andrew Riley's Intro to Git. That was done last year at some point. That was for your Git 101 session. A lot of this Git branching model and this Git-Flow model is based off of this Nivi site here. This is where it documents everything out in a very long form text format. And I'll have these slides and presentation online as well if you don't get the URLs. And another one that I found was pretty decent was this Introducing Git-Flow site as well. It just had a couple of different options there for you. So the main goal today was you go through and you now have this setup where I can build stuff on the site and keep everything coming together without worrying about losing commits or having to back up and push things I didn't want to push, things like that. Everything can stay abstracted to its individual tickets, and when things are ready, that's when they're ready to move up. A feature could live on for months before it gets merged and developed. One thing if you are living on for months, though, that I don't think I mentioned in there, is regularly when you have a feature going on for a longer period of time, go ahead and merge develop back into that feature branch. So when you're on the feature branch doing some work on it, before you start, if it's been 2 or 3 days, do a git fetch, rebase your develop, and then merge develop into that feature branch. That way you just have the most recent code. You can resolve any conflicts that might have come up, and you know a little more for the future where you're standing. You're using the most recent code base at that point. The worst thing that can happen is you work on it for months and months at a time. You've never touched develop, and now everything you just did has been migrated out of develop, and you've lost a lot of your stuff, and you're having to do twice more work for yourself. So any questions so far? I know we've got about, I think, less than 10 minutes. So I planned that we got through right on time where we wanted to be. There's got to be questions. I just threw so much information at you. It's a lot to take in, definitely.
How long, I take it you guys are using this internally.
We are, yes.
And how long have you been using this, and what problems have you run into? And give us your experience with it, please.
Sure, definitely. So we've been using it off and on from different projects. We're getting more adamant about it on all the newer projects now, and making sure that we really are following the naming conventions and the feature branching model for each piece of it. We're also about to start introducing the code review portion of it a lot more, just because in the past we've always just pushed to develop for the most part and used it for the releases. But the hotfixes has been a great thing so far for the sites I've been using it on, especially sites coming off of SVN into Git for that. Internal problems, we're working through right now some ideas in terms of how Git-Flow merges and finishes things. One of the things I've noticed is that if you finished a feature that had about 5 or 6 commits in it, it merged into develop, and you went to push and your develop hadn't been rebased yet, then for some reason at that point, it does a fast forward and all your commits now are directly on develop and you don't get that merge. And you don't, if you look at your tree, you don't have the individual commits showing that they are off on a different branch. They're all in line with that develop branch. We're working on some ideas and just testing out where that happens and when that happens and trying to put together some resources on that. That to me is one of the frustrating ones because I like to know if it was on a feature, which ones of these were with that feature at that point. Does that answer the question?
There's another question, but
Oh.
I can wait if there's others.
Okay, I thought so. No? Okay.
So have you worked, do you guys work on projects where your clients have developers and you have developers and you're all kind of like merging changes in?
Right.
And if you do that, where are the repositories hosted and how do you guys use this workflow with that?
Yeah, so we're using, our origin that we're using internally is Bitbucket. GitHub does it as well. We just found Bitbucket to be a little better for what we were wanting to do. Bitbucket also integrates directly with Jira. It's made by the same people of Jira. Atlassian who makes it. What we're looking at right now, what we've done in the past for that is granting the external contractors or external clients, developers, direct access to the repo that we're working off of. That's been good in most situations. In some situations, some people don't know how to use Git too much and has made some bad merges and lost a couple things. So what we're looking at now and we're researching more on is fork and pull requests. So that way we can keep internal stuff on it and then have the external go through a fork request and a pull request so that when they can fork off, make their changes, and then make a pull request back to us and we can merge those right back in at that point. That gives you, and that just is a good feature as well. It kind of brings together the code review we're trying to do right now on the feature branches, the internal code review, and brings that out to that external contractor level as well, in that since you manually have to make that pull request happen and merge back in, it gives you a reason to review that code real quick and make sure there's nothing that's going wrong or something that you might have added that they might not even realize that was getting blasted away, especially if you're using Drupal features. Someone didn't revert their feature, for instance, on a local environment, pushed it up, and you had pushed up other changes to it. You've just overridden somebody without even realizing you did it. So
How long have you been using this internally?
we've been going. We started on Git about a year ago, and Git-Flow has been being tested for about 6 to 7 months so far on things. And now we're really at the point now where every project has to be using it. It's a mandatory thing now for us.
What were you using before this?
Before we were on SVN, and there really wasn't much of a standardized process in line from that at that point, to be totally honest with you.
Did you look at any other workflows besides Git-Flow, and why did you choose Git-Flow?
Yeah, so there's others out there. I actually meant to mention some of them during this. There are other ideas out there. Git-Flow it's been around since 2010, I believe, is when it was initially made. So it's been out there. It's had a lot of testing going on with it, and there's a lot of support and other companies using it. So it's a very popular one. We didn't choose it strictly on popularity. For what we needed, it worked pretty well. I know I've seen some other enterprise levels looking at a couple variations on it, but there aren't full sets of tools for using it yet. Where most of our people are using the command line, we do have some that are still using SourceTree for certain things, and I believe SourceTree doesn't do hotfixes or releases. It just does features, really. So there's just a lot more stability in Git-Flow for where we needed to be on it and moving forward in that process. But there are definitely other options to do, and it doesn't stop you from making your own option either. I mean, Git-Flow is just a bunch of bash scripts, so.
You said SourceTree doesn't do hotfixes or releases?
I don't believe so, at least last I checked.
Would it still be viable?
I got it right now.
Does it now? Okay.
Feature, release, and hotfix.
Okay, excellent.
Okay,
I might have an older version then.
I was going to say, because wouldn't it still be viable for like people who are sort of in the development core and not so much in the release process?
Yeah, it definitely would be, and that's still what I was saying is still where it could be used for as well. I prefer, just from doing trainings and talking about Git more often in sessions, I don't like to use a GUI because it's different on everyone, and everyone can change their terminology somewhat. So I like to always do everything off the command line as a starting point. But I do have source tree installed. One of the things I really like about it is actually just the visual tree and seeing how the branches come off, and especially if you have 5 or 6 branches going at one time, where everything went and what's been merged back and things like
It's
that.
just also helpful to see your file lists, see what you're committing.
Exactly. Now there is built into Git Git-K, which can be used for that as well. I don't know where my test repo is, so I don't want to go through find anything. But it's a Git-K opens up, at least on OS X, Wish is a program, and that shows a lot of the visual pieces like source tree does as well. Not quite as user friendly, but it's there for you if you need to look at it.
Have you used TIG?
TIG?
Yeah.
I have not.
Tower is another one.
Tower. Yeah, I've heard of Tower. I hadn't used it, but it was one that saw a lot of places.
It's like $35 or something.
Yeah.
It's like source tree is free and it doesn't integrate
Yeah.
with Bitbucket.
I tend to like free myself. I mean, but I'm a developer, so we don't like to pay for much.
No.
There's a Windows beta out for
It should work with everything.
Is there? That's awesome. Because in the past, Tortoise was they had great support in SVN, and they've made a Tortoise Git for Windows. But when I tested at one point, it just wasn't quite at the same.
It's a little clunky.
Yeah.
Have you ever used Microsoft's version of source control?
Yes. Visual Source Safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I used it about 6 or 7 years ago.
Can I get your honest opinion?
I hated it. It was nice at the time because I didn't know any better really, and it just
A lot of code with it.
yeah, it's got so much code, and even just to me, Git with the distributed system of Git is just awesome. Where when I check out or clone that repository to my machine, I can do all the work I want without having to be connected to the internet or anything, and then push it all at the end of the day. Or if I'm on a plane or something, I can still keep working and still have my versions and my commits going, and I can still roll back locally. I can do everything right from my computer.
I just love when I try to work on a file and be like, nope, file's locked. Someone
Yeah,
else is using it.
exactly. And that person hasn't been in the office for days.
Well, it's all an evolution. I mean, that was good at its time. But
Mhm.
then it evolved
Yeah.
to some version, and now it's evolved.
And there's things too, like Perforce had Perforce had great things on it, like in terms of, I believe they're called workspaces. So you could take like all your Drupal modules and core Drupal be in its own repo stuff, and then pull those into an actual project. It's similar to how Git submodules work, but it just gets a little confusing there. To me, Git's been the best so far, but obviously there could be a whole cage match against all the different version control systems. Anyone still love CVS?
Pharmacy?
Ever love CVS?
Exactly. Did anyone ever really like it? That's the real question. Excellent. I think we're right out of time, but I'll be around. I had some cards laying out. I now have some cards laying out here if anyone needs anything. Or if you have any questions or things, feel free. I'll stick around. I'll be out in the hall and things like that as well. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. Mm-hmm.